welcome everyone to this panel discussion organized by Global Visions, where we discuss what a basic income society would look like. My name is Tallberg. I'm the founder and chairperson of the Global Visions Association. Our aim is to bring together people, groups and ideas that are striving to build a better world. And we are also all about enlightened improvement of the world. This is of course universal topic and debate, but we want to advance it in a fact-based, systematic and inclusive way. And this is now the second event that we are arranging, and I hope you all find it interesting.
Hello to everyone on my behalf as well. My name is Petri Lahtinen, and I'm currently the project planner of Global Visions, and I wish everyone a very productive and fruitful panel discussion, and I'm also going to briefly introduce our great panelists. Starting off from my left is Petteri Räty, who is the chairperson of BIEN Finland, BIEN being the Basic Income Earth Network. And next to Petteri we have Signe Jauhiainen, who is a senior researcher at Kela. And for anyone who might be watching this recording online who is not a Finnish person, I should clarify that Kela is the Finnish government agency in charge of settling benefits under national social security programs. And lastly but not least, we have Heikki Hiilamo, who is the professor of social policy at the University of Helsinki. So this is our panelist, and I'll let Max you introduce the first topic of today's general topic, that is basic income society.
Yes, thank you. So I thought that we could start with a kind of like an introductory question to this theme. And that is, what aspect or feature of universal basic income has made you support it? Heikki, you can start, please.
Well, I hope my mic is on. Well, I've been interested in this idea of basic income for a very long time. I guess I could be characterized as a basic income supporter perhaps some 10 years ago. But over the last few years, I think I've grown more skeptical towards basic income, and my proposal for future social policy is more like a participation income.
Okay, thank you. Signe, please.
This also might be a small disappointment, but I'm not a supporter of basic income. I'm neither against it. I'm a researcher, so I analyze and study basic income. So I see both pros and cons in basic income. So I think the positive features are that it's universal, it's unconditional, it can improve well-being, and then some more sort of problematic issues are, for example, how to finance basic income, and is it adequate enough to cover the basic needs for everybody?
Okay, thank you. Petteri, please.
Well, I can take up the lanterns at least. Unequivocally support basic income, which is maybe not a surprise to anyone, but I have a systems and operations research background from Aalto University, and I think one of the first things was when I was coming across research, I think it's from the government, like VATT, that looked at effective marginal tax rate, which is like the total effect of your taxes and changes in benefits, which were showing that for many situations in the Finnish society, you can be taxed more than 100%. So you go to work, you end up having less money than you started with. And in this context, when I started thinking about solutions, then universal basic income is one of the most straightforward. There are other ways, of course, they're more complex, but that is a clear solution how you could solve this one, because the models that we have, when at least UBIs are large enough, then are just a single tax rate or a couple of tax brackets on top for the work you've done. And then later down the road, like a concrete example lately was when we had high electricity prices now with the war in Ukraine, and the government started slashing out money in various ways to help people cope with the heating cost or electricity cost. And in this instance, it comes more close to helicopter money would have helped. It's not, of course, because it's time limited. It's not UBI per se, but it's quite close in concept to UBI, and would at least be much better than the way we ended up giving out handouts.
Okay, thank you. So let's now then turn to discuss what a basic income society would look like. And we thought that we would approach this theme through three larger themes. And the first concerns the economic realities of universal basic income. So we will look into the possibilities of financing it, for instance, among other economic issues. So what are the existing methods of financing a UBI, and is it a real economic possibility in the first place? Who would like to start?
Well, I can start and to reference one of the more concrete models in Finland we have from the Green Party and the Left Alliance. And the Green Party, the micro simulation, it's now a bit old, but the basic tenets are still valid these days, of course, inflation adjusted. But there was a 560 euro model, which could be financed by mostly two things. One is redirecting the existing social security spending, and the second parameter there was keeping the taxation for average earners roughly the same as it is. And that financed the 560 euro model. This is a partial universal basic income because it's not enough to live in Finland for 560 euros. So then we can see that if you want the 1,000 or so plus euros that is needed to just survive on universal basic income in, let's say, Helsinki, you would need a very drastic change in the cash flows in society and drastically would need to increase the revenues to the state.
One idea was introduced in the, how would you call it? It was in the subcommittee of social security reform, and the committee was called Alternative Models to Implement Social Security. And in that committee, we examined three different models. Of course, one was basic income, one was more like a universal credit model, and the third one was this some kind of sosiaalitili malli, social account model, yes. And in the basic income model, we introduced a new tax. So in microsimulation, it's quite easy to implement basic income, to remove other benefits and then introduce basic income. But to find out way to finance it, it needs quite complicated, not necessarily complicated, but quite profound tax reform. And in that report, we introduced a basic income tax for all income from work and also capital income. So if you want to know more about basic income tax, then you can look at that report.
Heikki, please.
Well, perhaps I can continue from what Signe said. I guess the conclusion on the basis of that microsimulation was that it's completely unrealistic to implement that type of a basic income because it would cost so much. There was also another microsimulation with very minor amount of basic income, and I think it could be a kind of a viable solution. But when it comes to that kind of approach, I think we need to make this distinction between politics of need and politics of recognition, where politics of need is that you have to have a social security system to support you through different type of life crises, like unemployment or disability or sickness or old age. So you need to have a social security system in place which would allow you to get enough money to cover your basic needs. So that's politics of need. And then there is politics of recognition, which is that it's a kind of recognition of an identity. And we can think about this cash child benefit which we have as a kind of a politics of recognition, in a sense that for most, I would say for most families, it doesn't play that much of a role in terms of benefit. It's more like a recognition that every child is entitled to a certain amount of money, and Kela is making this payment. So it's kind of one feature of being a resident, a legal resident or citizen of Finland. And I think we could have that kind of a basic income for everyone, but it would not be more than like a 50 euros. I think it was, the microsimulation was with 50 euros. But if you think about politics of need, I mean, in Finland you would need, if you also take into account a housing expenditure or housing costs, you would need like at least 1,000 euros a month for each person. And just collecting that money through taxes and paying that through Kela, for example, it would just expand our state budget. And I don't think it would not serve any greater purpose, since we already our system is probably one of the most comprehensive in the world. But this is the kind of a Finnish context. But then when we talk about basic income as a global idea, then I think it's a different case. And I think basic income can make sense, at least in certain global south context, like local villages, where you also can think about different forms of basic income, like a local currency type of basic income, or just taking basic income as kind of a recognition of the fact that people need support to live through the day. And I also like very much this idea of universality, because that's somehow connected with the idea of human rights, that every person is entitled to a certain thing just on the grounds of being born into this world. And then basic income is a kind of a recognition of that fact. And in that sense, I like this idea. But for a highly developed country, I'm not so convinced that universal basic income would actually solve any major problems. I think it would even create greater problems. And then you also need to think about political support. I think that type of a support is completely lacking if you just look at the people's willingness to pay taxes. And for example, our current government is actually cutting taxes and cutting benefits in the same time, meaning that actually the tax cuts are used. I mean, the cuts in social spending, in basic social security benefits are used to finance the tax cuts for richer persons. So it's completely against this idea of collecting more money and paying out basic income.
Petteri, go ahead.
Maybe supplement this with a bit. This is the short-term view, and of course, for the long-term view, the longer we look into the future, it's hard to say. But it is politically viable to see incremental steps going towards some goal. If we set some goal, we would not reach 1,000 euro UBI, and they take many parliaments. But if we had the willingness and we started going to some certain political direction, then the incremental tax changes implemented over a long time are still possible. If we look at, for example, the outphasing of the interest rate deduction for mortgages, no one's particularly complained about that. Of course, the interest rates have been low, but when it's done so slowly, as the saying goes, as the frog boils, it has generated surprisingly little political discussion, maybe now lately with the interest rates going up. But some similar thinking when someone sets a law and step by step increases stuff 20 years into the future might be politically, at least like you could vision such a thing that might not have political support at the moment.
That's one of the ideas I like about basic income movement, that it's about utopian idea, and it's having this very long view into the future. And I think we're lacking that kind of in our political debates, we are many times lacking that kind of visions. We're just dealing with the nitty-gritty things relating to just like one government period. But then when you have this vision, you also need to have a kind of idea of if basic income is the answer, so what is the question? Okay, in that context, we've mostly been discussing about digitalization and artificial intelligence. And I guess the idea of basic income really broke into the mainstream debate when some influential business leaders like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg said that the computer's gonna take away half of the jobs, and we definitely need to have a basic income for those who can't be employed any longer. Well, that kind of debate has been going. I think it already faded away until ChatGPT was introduced. And since then, when people have seen how powerful this technology is, I think it has revived this discussion of what is the future of work. And I think that's a relevant context. But even there, I think it's a kind of dystopian idea that we would have some persons who are really productive and they are entitled to participate in the labor market, and for the others, they're just giving this government handout and they're just living on a basic income. I think that would be a kind of a very, very dystopian view for the future. I think you would need to think about universal basic income as something which is inclusive. And my view for the future in terms of basic income, it doesn't relate so much to the technological change. It's mostly to this other big issue, which I think it's even more difficult to solve, namely climate change and distinction of species. And I think the only way to deal with those challenges is that people would spend less, and basic income could perhaps allow people to live happy lives, perhaps work a little bit less, spend less money for consumption, which is consuming our limited resources, and then perhaps find other purposes for life. But it's such a difficult debate, whether basic income is incentive for work. I think you were referring to marginal tax rates in your first talk, but I think we would perhaps, for me, I think the more promising idea for basic income is that it would actually be a disincentive for work, and we would welcome this idea of basic income as a disincentive for work.
Signe, since you represent Kela, who is now in charge of the social security in Finland, and here now in the previous talks, there's been the question of what justifies the implementation of basic income in a more advanced society such as Finland. But one classic argument presented is that it would make the current bureaucracy much more lighter, which is often deemed very complicated, frustrating, and confusing. So, as a researcher, do you have any take on that as a one reason to support basic income in an advanced society such as Finland?
I think there are two different perspectives in this question. First one is the Kela perspective, and I can tell you that the amount of money that Kela has and which Kela distributes is that 97% of all the money in Kela is paid to those who receive benefits, and only 3% is used for the bureaucracy. So making this less bureaucratic or making the implementation sort of more streamlined or less complicated, it's not way to finance basic income because it's only 3% of all the costs of benefits. But then there's of course the perspective of a human being or those who receive benefits, and from we have studied the Finnish basic income. We have asked about this in a survey that we have tested the recipients of basic income and the control group with different kind of indicators of well-being, and do they feel less bureaucracy when they receive basic income. And actually it helps people in that way, that there is less bureaucracy and there is less uncertainty. So people are more certain that they will receive the certain amount every month automatically. They don't need to fill any applications, or in that model they received the basic income and it was not means tested. Any income from employment did not decrease the amount of basic income, so it was quite secure, no bureaucracy, and that's, I think it might increase the well-being of individuals, that kind of less bureaucratic and unconditional model.
One thing to add there, that the most bureaucratic and problematic one is income support, and that's the hardest benefit because it's the benefit of last resort to replace with the UBI. So there's the kind of the problem that if we start replacing the lowest benefits, those are not the ones who feel the burden of bureaucracy the most, because the worst one is in income support, where you need to give your account statements and justify that you have no assets. Would require UBI of paying your rent plus 500, might be more like 600 these days for living, and we can see in Helsinki that's way over 1,000 euros. So there we come back to the original discussion that that's the hardest one to get to.
Well, it's not actually a benefit. It's called minimum income scheme, where the idea is that you're just guaranteed a certain level of income if your other income sources fall below a certain line. So I think that's what makes also discussion very difficult, because people take it as a benefit while it's actually just a kind of a guaranteed minimum income scheme.
Yeah, it's a top up. It's very rare that someone gets 1,000 euros of this income support, or we call it social assistance, because they only get the sort of the missing part of the income. So usually it's only like 200 or 300 euros.
Yeah, I was referring to the whole like total situation that you would not need to apply for it at all.
And isn't there, if I remember correctly, you will certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't the situation in Finland for quite a while been such that there are a lot of people who would, in theory, their condition and situation would allow them to apply for social benefits, but a quite big number of those people never actually do apply for some sort of social security that they would receive.
Yes, and especially in the social assistance, that people do not. All those households who are entitled do not apply for social assistance, but it's not the majority, it's the minority, about maybe 30% or something like that. It's quite difficult to analyze what is the amount of those who are eligible and do not apply. One study has examined that especially those who have more short-term need for social assistance do not apply. So those who those who have a really small income for a longer time, they usually apply for social assistance. So it's not that problematic, but that benefit is of course very, it takes a lot of time and energy to apply for it. You need to really give really detailed information about your expenses and income.
Heikki, since you briefly mentioned the environmental issues, I would like to briefly go back there. First of all, to mention that there's until now various basic income trials have been insufficient in that case that they don't include in the initial designing phase that the environmental aspect, or thus far haven't been included that, and the research done on the possible positive environmental effects that basic income might have are thus somewhat insufficient. But going towards a question that I had regarding that is that even though there's no assertive data on the positive effects of basic income on the environment, but some or quite a number of researchers have made the argument that a lot of majority of the problems that are causing majority of the current ecological problems could be solved by major taxation of the 10 richest percent of the whole population. So that might be radical, of course, to tax the richest percent of the whole population. But could that be, as you mentioned, this universal basic income as an utopian idea? So if we approach UBI as a solely utopian idea, could that be a one approach of finding alternative ways to finance universal basic income?
Well, I think inequality is a problem per se, and I think you need to make a distinction between a kind of an income support policy or social security policy and then taxation policy. I mean, you can have a penal tax on the rich without a basic income, and vice versa. Well, I think it's a different debate. Some people have suggested tax on fossil fuels as a one source of income for to finance basic income. Well, I think we would need that kind of a tax anyway, also for other reasons. It can be used to finance social security systems as well, but we would need that in any case. And then another issue is something which you, Petteri, also raised, is that if we are take this green transition seriously, it means that the cost of fossil fuels have to increase. And then the question is, how is that going to be compensated for low-income households? And what would be the most efficient system to make that compensation? And for that purpose, I think we could think about some sort of grants which could take form of I mean, in any way, that would be a unconditional compensation, because it's compensation for you to continue your lifestyle, even though the gas prices are getting sky high.
Anything to add, Petteri, to that? I've understood that you have also pondered upon the environmental issues of basic income at some level.
Yes, I have. For disclosure, I'm also a member of the Greens in Finland, but not here in any political capacity, and also don't hold any office, just to clarify. Yes, exactly. As Heikki said, there's that. And then in general in tax policy, we have to collect money from somewhere. And if you take a more comparative approach, do you want to tax work or do you want to tax externalities, which is like things like emissions? Then at least for me, it's clear we know that there is a lack of the debate that if you raise one tax, then another tax couldn't go down. That's kind of missing in Finnish discussion often. That there is you can do tax change without changing the state revenues, the final line of the state budget by switching where you collect taxes from. And it's quite clear in the climate discussion that taxing externalities more would be good policy regardless of if you want to increase or decrease state budget, because you could then decrease taxes on work.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of a weak part of our income transfer system is that we don't use the tax system to reduce income inequalities that much. If you think about, for example, this tax credit you're going to get for household services, you could reform that tax credit in a way which would actually support lower income people to use those services. Nowadays it's mostly going for middle classes and upper classes because they have the money to buy those services. Low income people, they don't have the money to buy those services in the first place, and that's why they're never going to get the credit. So it's possible to have a regressive tax credits and tax allowances. In mostly Anglo-American countries, you have earned income tax credits, which are really important. For example, in the US and also in UK.
I would be curious to hear more about the model that you are advocating for, Heikki, the participatory model. What is it about, and why do you support it?
Well, the idea is that it's I mean, if universal basic income is really broad idea concerning everyone, this participation income is just for the marginal group of people who don't stand a chance in the labor market, and currently they are subject to all kind of sanctions. So they have to take part in the rehabilitative work, or they have to do sometimes even some forced labor activities, and they don't have any agency in determining what type of activities they need to do. So the idea for this model is that for those who actually don't have, at least in the short run, any chance to make it to the open labor markets, they would be allowed to suggest activities which would contribute for the community or for broader environment in some way, like voluntary work. Sometimes it could be just participating in rehabilitation or taking language courses. It could be care work, taking care of your children or your frail parents or somebody else, a child or elderly person. And you could suggest those activities, and then you could get a kind of a top-up to your benefit. Currently you have this top-up. I don't know if our new government is going to take away those top-ups, but currently you have a top-up if you participate in some active labor market policy measures. But so this idea would just broaden this scope of activities, and it could also include some activities which could relate to protecting the environment, like gardening or eco-social services or recycling, or taking care of some forest areas or some distant parks, for example.
Should we then move to the second topic, if no one else has any comments or on what was just said? Petteri.
It's not a comment on that, but it's a general comment on the tax system. Briefly to say that the most common reason for us to tax something is that it was an easy place to place a tax at some point in the history, and then then we keep taxing that. For example, payroll is an easy place to tax. quite often our taxes are not based on that this would be like this is the like convenient place to tax, not that this is the place where the taxing makes most sense.
Well, I think when you talk about payroll, you need to make this distinction between general taxes and then insurance payments, because insurance payments they are regarded as taxes. I mean, they're mandatory payments, but they are actually an insurance. So they are insurance against job loss or insurance about reaching old age, and it's not. I mean, we don't have a personal accounts in our social insurance system, but it's an insurance, and you shouldn't take those as taxes in that sense.
Yeah, I was referring to just straight up income taxes in the payroll, which are still more than the insurance payments, because our payroll hides the pension payments behind the employer and they don't show up in the payroll.
But those payments, they are actually for, I think it's also every time it is employees' money, because it's just used for the employees' benefit. I mean, back in the old days, the companies were able to borrow back the money to finance investments when the credit market was restricted. But nowadays it doesn't play any role.
Okay, so let's next look at the positive benefits of a basic income if it will be implemented at some point in the future. So the data gathered from trials indicate that it increases the general well-being of its recipients, but it could probably also have societal benefits as well. So what could these positive effects be both for the individual and society?
Since Petteri, you are the representative of BIEN Finland, maybe you would like to list some of these positive.
So yeah, the way that often the results from the trial are presented, that it didn't incentivize people to work, but I would also say that on the other hand, it also didn't show that it would lead people to stay in couches, as the stereotypical saying says, that people stay at home, don't do nothing. So you can take the Kela trial, depending if your glass is half full or half empty, you can look at it both ways. But yeah, the clear there was, as Max mentioned, was the mental health benefit. But of course, you always have to look at these systems in a whole. If we do the more like social dividend model of UBI financing, then we have tied into the environmental benefits and those, and then there's the clear societal benefit that comes not from UBI, but from the financing that causes us to pay UBI, produces the clear financial benefits. It still remains, of course, from a scientific perspective, untested what would happen in many of the cases. We had a societal level random control trial and implemented UBI in, let's say, a middle class. Though there are accidental UBIs around the world. For example, in Iran, they had a fossil fuel benefit that they ended, and when it's adjusted for purchase power, it was like a plus $1,000 or euro, is kind of 1-to-1 that they ended up paying there, and that showed that in there were cases where people worked more. So then it's that kind of a double whammy of you have like a secure base and you still contribute to society in various ways, and often in more by working more. Not that the necessary work depends on your values, of course, if you define working as societal benefit, but maybe so far we should say that, like, to keep things running, everyone needs to work, because we do not have to have the robots keeping society running.
So, positive effects of basic income. In our case in Finland, the discussion is a lot about, you started from the incentives for work. And actually when the government wanted to introduce the basic income experiment, the idea was to find a new model to implement social security, which is less complicated, less bureaucratic, and also to introduce better incentives for work. So employment in our case, or the incentives for work, are in the Finnish case, they are in the center of the basic income discussion. So of course in theory and also in a small amount in practice also it increases employment. So in the experiment the effect of basic income on employment was small, but it was positive. And then of course we examined that those who received basic income, they estimated their well-being better than those who received the normal unemployment benefits. So as I said, the security and a simple model. But this, I think this is, as Heikki said, this is the context of a sort of welfare state, Nordic welfare state. And in this case, basic income is more like an alternative to our social security. And in this case, the positive effects are, I think they are limited because we already have the comprehensive social security system. But in more global perspective, in many cases, for example, in developing countries, basic income it's an issue of poverty. So guaranteeing some small income for everybody and introducing sort of a way to guarantee sort of enough food or education or medicine for everybody. So it's a completely different picture, and I think that some of the positive effects are sort of more visible in that context.
Well, just commenting on that, I think you need to think about opportunity costs because I think there are a lot of faults in the basic economic theories, but I think it's quite robust finding that the more money you get, the happier you are. And if you have a basic income experiment where there is very weak benefit scheme in place or no benefit scheme at all, and then you give people more money, what do you think if it's gonna make them happier or not? Quite possibly it'll make them happier. But then the opportunity cost is that, or is this the best scheme to actually reach the goals what you aim at? And I think it would not be the best scheme, because if we have a nationwide basic income in a poor country, you would also spend a large part of the budget for those people who don't actually need the money. And if you have, when you have a limited budget, it means that those people who actually need the money the most, they would only get a small slice. And that small slice wouldn't matter for those who are better off. So I think you would need to think about better models with some sort of targeting. And if you think about all the basic experiments which have been conducted, they have been targeted in one way or another. I think the beauty of the Finnish experiment was that actually you were getting this equal amount of money whether you were in the treatment as usual group or in the intervention group, that is the basic income group. And that's when we were able to test those actually three different mechanisms. One was this work incentives, meaning that if you got some extra money, you were able to keep the money. And then the second one was this absence of sanctions. So you were not forced to participate any active labor market policy measures if you didn't want to. And then the third was kind of a predictability, which you, Signe, referred to. And it seems that overall, I think these work incentives, they didn't seem to play that big role. I mean, I was expecting more positive results, and I think many others were expecting more positive results. Meanwhile, this absence of sanctions you were quite surprised to see that the people, that even though they were not forced to participate in the activities, they actually participated in the activities, which was a positive sign, meaning that you don't actually have to force people to participate because they know what's best for them, and they will participate if they think it's meaningful. And then this predictability, I think it's somehow connected to the positive well-being effects. Well, we have some doubts because, as you, Signe, said, this study wasn't designed to analyze well-being effects. So there was no baseline survey, and the actually cross-sectional survey, which was conducted at the end of the experiment, had quite small turn-up. But there has been some indication. Well, I'm very sorry that it hasn't been published yet, even though it's already more than 5 years since the end of the experiment. But there is some evidence to show from the Reseacher studies that people had a better mental health if they were getting basic income. So I think it's given more credibility for the finding that, or for the claim that it had positive well-being effects.
Petteri, you were eager to comment, and maybe
it's a more continuation of the global effects that we have a significant amount of global population still living unbanked and in a sustenance economy, and it's not the UBI then is providing the benefits, but the fact that you need to become part of the banking system to receive UBI. It's probably not going to be paid in rice or something like that. It's going to be paid in cash. So then there are lots of benefits that are clear from being part of the banking system, the access to loans and such, that would be enabled by paying a small amount, a partial UBI in developing countries.
I just have a short clarification. I agree with Heikki, and if you listen me carefully, I do not talk about the effects on well-being. I talk about that those who received basic income, they evaluated their well-being better than those who received the normal unemployment benefit. So it's based on a limited survey, so that's why I'm not talking about well-being effects in the context of Finnish basic income experiment.
One term that was mentioned previously was this previously highly esteemed, especially in Nordic countries, the model of welfare state, which has during recent years or even decades now, some theorists have argued that there's been shifts from the welfare state towards a workfare state, where in advanced societies, instead of focusing on the well-being of its citizens, it's more concerned with their ability to work, and by work meaning especially wage labor. So and going back to the positive effects which we have discussed now, for example on the mental health issues, do you think that the basic income, the one positive effects that it would have would be on increasing? Usually it's said that the personal freedom of individuals to pursue things that they could not pursue otherwise, but maybe more broadly that they focusing on things that are not related to wage labor and increase in value or surplus value. For example, what Heikki mentioned, like doing communal work for the benefit of the environment, gardening projects and recycling and whatever. So any thoughts on that? To summarize, the shifts from the welfare state to the workfare state and the effects that basic income could have, that would be something measured outside the conventional wage labor sphere?
Well, if I start, I mean, when our grandfathers and grandmothers, when they were designing this Nordic welfare state model back in the 70s and 60s, they couldn't imagine this demographic change. So I think it was quite easy to think about improving benefits and more comprehensive and more generous schemes, because most of the people, they were in working age. They couldn't predict that there's going to be a big decline in fertility, and they were also quite certain that we will have a similar level of economic growth and also similar level of productivity growth. But that hasn't actually occurred, and now we are in a kind of a permanent austerity, because we don't have enough people to pay all the services and benefits people are entitled to. That's just a sad fact of life. And then in that sense, what we need is to put more people into employment, to make more people to pay taxes instead of getting benefits. There was a Danish scholar, Gösta Esping Andersen, who invented this idea of 3 worlds of welfare capitalism. Like that, we have the Nordic model, and we have the Anglo-Saxon model, and then we have the continental model. And he characterized this Nordic model as the model where this something decommodification degree is highest. Decommodification means that your work is a commodity which you sell in the labor markets, and then it's a decommodified when the welfare state allows you to stay outside the labor market. And now we're talking about recommodification, so we want to put more people into employment. But of course, we in this Nordic welfare state model think about people as individuals and as people who have abilities and competencies to improve their situation. So whenever you get a benefit, you are not expected to pay back this benefit in terms of forced labor. Instead, you are encouraged or incentivized to increase your human capital, so that at some point you would be able to enter the labor market, re-enter or enter the labor market again. This welfare state is that it's a moral obligation to pay back this benefit. So it doesn't matter what you do. This work, this forced work, doesn't need to serve any purpose for yourself. It's just like you pay back the benefit for the society. It's a moral obligation. Meanwhile, our thinking used to be more like that we have activation policies. So we try to activate people to increase their human capital, and we're not gonna make them to do cleaning the streets or picking berries or something like that, just as a form of paying back the benefits. So that's quite. So it's not in our thinking. But if you read the new government program, I think you can find some clues of this workfare thinking as well.
Yeah, I would like to reinforce the thought that with UBI, and when you produce value to someone else, it's not supposed to be that you use the UBI to produce value to someone else. You should be compensated for the value you create for someone else. A good example is the collecting cans thing from an environmental perspective. You go there and you get the cans, you get the value back. Or then from non-profit perspective, if we had a high enough UBI, meant people who had more disposable income, they would then be able to more easily pay membership fees to associations, and when you worked for the association, you would get paid for that. When now the situation is more so, well, you do it without compensation because the association is so poor because the members don't have the means to pay it. But I think it's important to consider that the value you create, if it's not for yourself, but it's for external parties, you also get compensated for it when you have UBI.
On the possible positive effects on individuals that the UBI might have, even in a advanced society such as Finland, one thing that I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on is that there's this Finnish journalist Tuomas Muraja, who was part of the previous basic income trial here in Finland, and he wrote a book about his experience, and he seems to fit perfectly that group of people that would also highly benefit from a basic income, and that is people working either in the creative field or in academic field, which nowadays is increasingly characterized by its precarity, that you don't have a long-lasting and stable work there, but you go from one project to another, and in such a case, for example, Tuomas Muraja argued that the basic income would be actually kind of function as this kind of safety net for those kind of people. And further on that, you, Heikki, mentioned, for example, the AI, and now when previously people were concerned that robots will take over manual labor, but with the dawn or the sudden shift of the AI to the mainstream, it seems that actually the AI is now taking over like writing jobs and stuff like that, and there's already been cases where people who have worked, for example, done writing jobs, have gone to installing air conditionings and systems and stuff like that. So would you imagine that in these sort of scenarios that basic income would be also in an advanced societies welcomed social security innovation?
I would say one thing about the AI and things, that computers didn't remove the need for work, so didn't automobiles when they replaced horses and when people stopped working in the farming jobs. So these hype cycles show up every so often, but so far people have then just changes the structure of the job market. And I think given we have many of these societal changes examples from past, it's the safe base assumption is the AI will be just a similar thing and will not cause for everyone to get out of jobs. I think there's a burden of proof is higher for those who claim that they will make human work unnecessary for many fields. The more likely explanation, in my opinion, is that it will just shift to people doing something else for the work that it replaces. But yeah, of course, as you said, for people who are not on a steady 37.5-hour contract in Finnish context, they benefit more from of course, the safety net function of UBI, because they come across unemployment more often.
I think these examples which you mentioned, I think that they tell that we need some kind of social security reform. It's not necessarily basic income, but we need to reform the social security system to better sort of respond the needs of working life today. For example, this kind of increased risk of unemployment or short-term employment or other type of gigs and different kind of work relationships. So I think one feature is that the future social security needs to be less complicated, and also the how to combine work and social security needs to be less complicated than it's today.
Well, I would like to highlight the collective dimension of social security. I think, well, I mean, we can think about different kind of unemployment scenarios resulting from AI. Another issue is what's going to happen with existing employment, whether people going to get their fair share of the productivity growth or not. I mean, historical development shows that it's not self-evident that if there are better machines and more improved technology that will benefit everyone. I mean, we have seen very long periods of time when actually the working conditions have deteriorated, and people have been working more and getting actually less money. So social security is very much connected to collective action by the workers. And if you think about the future social security models which would somehow ignore that dimension, we could end up in quite different, quite more unequal world. So I think when we've been looking at different explanations for reducing inequality, it seems that the most robust finding is the power of the labor unions explaining reduction in inequality. So labor unions have been very important in reducing, in developing social security, in introducing tax policies, transfer policies, which are reducing inequality, and also extracting benefits from productivity growth, so that not everything is going for the capital owners. So this is so far the labor unions have been quite skeptical towards universal basic income, and I think we need to take that criticism seriously.
Talking of equality, should we then go to our third and final topic of tonight?
Yes, so let's finally look far into the future and envision a society where UBI would be implemented. So if it would be harnessed as part of the project of making a society more just and equal, could this affect, for instance, the polarization and populism that you see in societies today? Yeah, who wants to start? Petteri?
Reducing populism. Well, in a sense that, of course, ties back to how large the UBI we have. If it's high enough, I can clearly see that kind of left behind thinking in an economic sense be like, but if it's still combined with a societal mindset that like being on some kind of cash transfer is kind of frowned upon, it won't necessarily help, but it's also a mindset thing. So you need two things that it's the mindset in the society, and then of course that you get by. We do know from that the being poor gets inherited between families quite heavily. So if we have a UBI that is high enough that the level of poverty is lower, then we can start breaking some of these chains that currently are intergenerational. When if your parents are poor, you're likely to still stay poor in Finland.
I think this is really difficult question. I cannot see that far that what's going to happen. But of course, these aims are good. That we need more equal society, and I think that there is less populism and polarization in equal society. But I'm not sure whether the universal basic income is the sort of the key element in this kind of development.
What could the key elements then be?
I don't know.
I think it's more about the role of democracy. What we have seen over the last few decades is very negative development on a global scale in individual countries and also overall in democratic development. And I think it's somehow related to internet, social media, and it's distracting policy making, and I think it's also preventing us from tackling the most important issues which should be tackled, like the role of the big tech companies, their power to harness technology for their own benefit, and also climate change, those kind of issues. I don't know how universal basic income relates to this topic, but of course, if you think about when what I mentioned earlier, this basic income as kind of a politics of recognition, that it would somehow engage people in their local communities and in national context to participate in democratic decision making and tackling the real issues which we have at hand, then basic income would actually be a beneficial program.
Heikki, you mentioned in the very beginning, if I remember correctly, the idea of a UBI as a global project and its possible benefits possibly on the less developed countries. So, do you have anything to elaborate on that? If that universal basic income would be implemented as a global project, which would have the aim of increasing the level of well-being and satisfying the basic needs of less developed countries. Do you have anything to elaborate on that?
Well, if I would be the leader of the ruler of the world, I would give at least I would give at least $10 a day for or a month for every citizens. But I don't foresee that long that we would have a kind of a global government and a global or world leader who would take these benevolent decisions. But I've been a little bit engaged with the European level basic income movement, and I have been welcoming this idea at least to have European level basic income for the children. It's not my idea, it's been advocated by some very prominent scholars, and I think it's a very nice idea because if you think about a social policy program, and if you think about that institution which is giving you money, you have a kind of a positive connection to that institution. I know that many people criticize Kela, but it also makes us a community. So I think people would perhaps have a more positive view on European level democratic decision making if every child would get money from the European Union.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yes, also thinking in fact on the global level from the perspective of climate, that it is the Western world that has contributed the biggest share of emissions, and if we want to somehow compensate this going forward, then a UBI would be a great way to do that, because when adjusted for purchasing parity, it does a lot more in those areas that are affected by the historical emissions that we have caused.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the sad reality that those poor countries and people, especially the poor people in poor countries who live from the subsistence agriculture, they have contributed nothing to the global warming, and they will be the first victims because of the change in the climate. Because I mean, for us who are working in offices, I mean, it's probably just a little bit unpleasant if the weather is getting too hot, but for them it's a question of life and death. can they continue getting their livelihood from that from those fields or not? And we have this idea of three types of interventions, like mitigation, adaption, and then loss and damage, that the rich countries would actually pay back, compensate for the fact that we have been ruining the globe. And in that context, some sort of basic income could be a solution.
Signe, Petteri mentioned the mindset of people associating for example, the experience of shame while living of social security and the stigma of being poor, and also he mentioned the mindset related to that. So as a researcher at Kela, do you feel that or do you have any view on if basic income would be implemented, that would it have to be combined with also some sort of project of changing the general mindset about these topics that Petteri mentioned?
I think that probably not, because in that case it would be universal, so everybody would get it. So there is no division for those who receive it and do not receive it. And I think in some cases in our current social security system we also have this kind of elements, that they are universal. They are not only for the poor, but that they are universal, and I think this is good. And one example is that when the social assistance was centralized to Kela from the municipalities, it was one way to sort of to make it more easy to apply online, and then it's you don't need to go you don't need to go to see a social worker. You can just apply for the financial aid from Kela. So it might be less problematic, and there might be less stigma when you are a customer of Kela, because everybody is a customer of Kela at some point of their life. So I think we can move to this direction also in our current system. But I want to go back to one point you were talking about the families and generations and young people. So I think this is one of the maybe one perspective that we might need more analyze and more discussion about what would be the best way to reform social security to support families and reduce child poverty. And is basic income a good model for that? Maybe, maybe not. But what would be? And because the reducing child poverty would be vital for some to get, because child poverty has a really long effect in people's lives. So that's why we need more solutions to reduce child poverty. And one interesting empirical fact is that in Wales they are actually implementing basic income for those young people who are leaving social care. So if they have been in foster care when they were under 18, and when they leave this care system, they will receive basic income. And I think this is it would be impossible in Finland to introduce, this kind of model, but I think it's very interesting to see what will happen to these young people when they receive basic income after leaving social care.
You mentioned family and Heikki, you also talked about the communities, and going back again to the environmental questions. I remember reading upon when there was, maybe it was at the design phase of a basic income trial in Canada, that the local indigenous tribal council members expressed their concern that a basic income paid to individuals would only increase individualistic culture, where the one elemental part is personal consumption, and they were interested of having this basic income implemented more as a communal project. So when pursuing issues such as greater equality and justice, do you feel that the basic income, as it has been now understood as a social security paid to individuals, that in the future there's maybe more positive potential if it's expanded, for example, to families or even greater communities?
I think it's a fundamental feature of UBI is that it's an individual benefit. And that's criticism of the means testing happening on a household level, which is reducing incentives for work and which is quite bad in many different ways. UBI has been also criticized for the fact that it doesn't include basic services. So there is a complementary idea to UBI, which is universal basic services. And services, they are more communal in a sense that you think about access and people are using the same services. They have the service in the same facilities, and they meet with people, and they make friends and social relationships while they participate in the services. So if you think about a future society, you would not just it would not suffice to only look at income schemes. So you would also need to think about access to basic services and the availability and the quality of basic services.
And of course, even if it's individual place, let's say on a family level, nothing prevents you from paying the UBI to a joint account where everyone just spends the money. So from a voluntary perspective, at least on a family level, it's easy to implement it use it as a common pot of money. I don't claim to say that how like the indigenous tribes would feel about this, but the same thing is of course applicable there, but I can't comment because I don't know that culture but very well. In a Finnish context though, if you want to spend the money on a family level, it's already doable. Many people do use joint accounts, so if the money comes there, it's joint money.
Well, and this community aspect has been addressed in some of the basic income pilots, like the one there is in the Gyeonggi province surrounding a capital city of Seoul, where this basic income is paid for young people. I think they are in their early 20s, and it's paid in form of a local currency. So you can only use the money for local enterprises, and actually it's just like small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's actually benefiting the community, not just those youngsters who are getting the money.
Any more thoughts or comments on UBI and the future? Or something that has been left unsaid that you would still like to say?
Maybe only a small anecdote about that Korean basic income experiment when they give this small basic income to young people to spend in a local marketplace or in local restaurants, and because we get many visitors from different countries at Kela to see or to hear about the Finnish basic income experiment, and one group from Korea, from that province, they listened my presentation, and then they laughed and said that this is not the basic income experiment. When they heard about the Finnish basic income experiment, I was quite polite, and then I didn't reply, but I thought that your basic income experiment is neither a basic income experiment, it's only a local currency. So we have many different kind of ideas what is the basic income. And also in this discussion you have introduced a huge variety of themes that we think that the basic income might be a solution or might introduce some new perspective to our society.
So yeah, if you think UBI is a great thing and you want to advance it, of course, on our website, perustulo.org, you can join our association to become a member. That's some shameless plugging here. And of course, the central reason why we don't have UBI in Finland is that there's no parliamentary majority for it. So vote for the politicians that support UBI if you wanted to see it implemented on the Finnish level.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Let me just repeat the question for people who might have not heard it watching the video of this. So the question was that what would be the sufficient or appropriate amount of basic income to have the supposed positive effects of basic income would have on a psychological level.
I think there is no such research to answer that question. I think in the planning phase of the Finnish basic income experiment, there was this idea to experiment with different levels. But then the experiment budget was cut down by the fact that also the money which was paid for those who were not getting the basic income, it was considered as part of the budget. So those more ambitious plans with the research group had, they were not able to realize them.
I would say that the amount is not or was not the issue in the Finnish case, because those who received the normal unemployment benefit and those who received basic income, they received the same amount of money. So that's why, from that perspective, we might think that it's that the other features of basic income, in that case, are the main sort of main drivers or features of that sort of certainty or better well-being, better mental health.
Yeah, and I would say that like there's probably clear to say that €1 isn't enough, and then 1,000 euros is enough. Where it's in between is an open question, but I think it comes down to the fact that which of the benefits are you able to replace with it. As soon as you're able to replace, let's say, labor market subsidy, and then you have at least, as said before, the mental model that I don't have to go to the unemployment office even if you end up actually using it, but you have the option in your mind that you don't need to go there, and it is a significant level that you can replace labor market subsidy. I don't remember what the level is now, but 600 plus minus something, but maybe you remember what it is now. But around that level, if it's significantly less than what was in the basic income trial, you won't have the option to like kind of opt out of the unemployment office activities at least.
Okay, thank you everyone once again. Thank you.